You can spot her from a mile away. The one who doesn't shrink to fit. The one who walks into a room like she owns her name. She's young, but don't mistake that for naive. She's powerful, and that makes people uncomfortable. This world will beg her to dilute herself, to play small, to fake it just enough to be digestible. But hear me loud and clear. Never fake a young woman. She is not a version. She is not a brand. She is not here to be packaged. She is the fire, and you either respect it or get burned. Because pretending is a betrayal. And when a young woman fakes who she is, laughs when it's not funny, hides when she wants to shine, shrinks when she was born to stand tall, something inside her dies. Piece by piece, smile by smile, until she forgets what her real voice even sounds like. And for what? To be liked, to be less intimidating, to be chosen. No, you are not here to be chosen. You are here to choose yourself. And that means showing up real, loud, unapologetically whole. People will call you too much before they even understand what you're made of. They'll say it in hushed tones, in backhanded compliments, and sometimes with a smile that hides their discomfort. But what they're really saying is, you make me see my own limits. Your presence forces them to confront what they've been too afraid to chase. Your confidence, your clarity, your fire, it unsettles the parts of them that have been silent for too long. That's not your fault. And it's not your responsibility to shrink so they feel tall. The problem isn't that you're intimidating. It's that they're intimidated. And that difference matters. A young woman who knows who she is and dares to live that truth in public is not a threat. She's a mirror. And most people can't look directly into a mirror that reflects their own mediocrity. When you carry power and purpose, people who haven't tapped into their own will either try to mimic you or minimize you. The mimicry might come in the form of flattery, imitation, even admiration. But make no mistake, when they realize they can't replicate what you have because it's rooted in authenticity, not performance, the flattery turns cold. That's when they start to talk. That's when they label you difficult, cold, arrogant, or aggressive. But what they're really doing is protecting their own ego. Your strength threatens the illusion they've built about themselves, and rather than rise to meet your energy, they'll try to convince you to lower yours. Don't. Never apologize for standing tall. Never dilute your essence to make others feel comfortable in their smallness. It is not your job to keep the room calm. It's your job to be the storm that wakes it up. Power in a young woman is magnetic, not because it conforms, but because it disrupts. It breaks the rhythm. It questions the rules. It refuses to play the roles written for it. And that disruption is what brings change. But understand, people fear change. They fear what they can't predict or control. So when your power walks into a space, their instinct might be to diminish it before it reshapes everything they've gotten used to. That's how society maintains its illusion of control. By convincing strong women to play weaker parts, they'll call your boundaries walls. They'll call your standards unrealistic. But don't flinch. Let them talk. Let them label. Just don't let them redefine you. The minute you start adjusting your brightness for their comfort, is the minute you give away the one thing they can never match: your raw, unapologetic presence. Too many young women spend their energy trying to be palatable, to be accepted, to be agreeable. They adjust their tone, their opinions, their wardrobe, even their dreams, just to be perceived as enough. But enough for who? For what? The idea that you have to be less so others can feel more is not empowerment. It's manipulation dressed as advice. You weren't put here to be acceptable. You were put here to be undeniable. And when you stop chasing validation, you start commanding respect. That shift is everything. It's the moment you realize that not everyone's approval is worth having. That being misunderstood is sometimes the cost of being powerful. That shaking things up is better than blending in. Because when you blend in, no one sees you. But when you stand firm in who you are, they have no choice but to look up. The moment you fully embrace your power, without apology or performance, is the moment the game changes. You stop waiting for permission. You stop asking to be seen. You become a force, not a fixture. And yes, that kind of presence can be lonely. Yes, it might mean losing people who were only comfortable with your smaller self. But what you gain in return is freedom. Freedom from pretending. Freedom from pleasing. Freedom from playing roles that never fit you. And in that freedom, you'll find something even more powerful than validation: peace. The kind of peace that comes from knowing you didn't trade your fire for a seat at a table you didn't even want to sit at. And remember, power isn't just loud. It doesn't always show up in heels and headlines. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's in your silence, your stillness, your refusal to explain yourself. Power isn't always about proving. It's about knowing. Knowing who you are when no one's watching. Knowing what you stand for when it's inconvenient. Knowing you don't need to fake softness to be worthy of respect. You can be bold and kind. You can be fierce and compassionate. You can own every part of who you are without slicing yourself into pieces to fit anyone's comfort zone. That's the kind of woman the world isn't ready for, but desperately needs. And that's exactly who you were born to be. Stop performing. Stop rehearsing your words in your head just to make them sound softer. Stop walking into rooms already calculating how to make yourself more likable. That kind of mental gymnastics will break you in ways no one can see. The world has conditioned young women to believe that likability is currency. Smile enough. Agree enough. Don't be too loud. Don't be too real. And maybe, just maybe, they'll accept you. But here's the truth. Likability is a moving target. And chasing it will rob you of yourself. You'll bend, twist, and reshape who you are for people who never had the capacity to value the real you in the first place. And at the end of the day, they still might not like you. But worse, you won't like yourself either. That's the real loss. That's the real tragedy. Authenticity is not always glamorous. It doesn't always feel powerful. Sometimes it's uncomfortable. Sometimes it means saying the thing that makes people squirm. Sometimes it means being the only one in the room who doesn't nod in agreement. But being real means choosing integrity over image. It means standing in your truth when every voice around you is whispering. Be careful. It's not about being liked. It's about being whole. And wholeness comes at a cost. You'll lose shallow connections. You'll disappoint people who only love the watered down version of you. But in that loss, you gain something far more valuable: the right people. The ones who don't just tolerate your truth. They're drawn to it. They're inspired by it. They respect it. And most importantly, they match it. When you chase likability, you start filtering your power. You second guess your instincts. You rehearse your opinions. You measure your presence so you don't come off too strong, too intense, too intimidating. But you weren't made to be measured. You weren't made to be a careful calculation of just enough. You were made to take up space. Not because you're trying to overpower anyone, but because you finally understand your worth. Every time you soften your voice when you want to roar, every time you downplay your wins so others don't feel small, every time you laugh at a joke that insults your values just to keep the peace, you chip away at your authenticity. And the world doesn't need another polite echo. It needs your real, raw, unfiltered voice. There's a myth that being real makes you hard to love. That being blunt makes you cold. That being strong makes you unapproachable. But the truth is, the people who are threatened by your truth were never meant to be close to you. You don't need everyone to love you. You need the courage to stop performing for those who never saw you in the first place. You weren't born to be liked by the masses. You were born to be respected by the right few. And respect doesn't come from being palatable. It comes from being principled, from saying what you mean, from standing by what you believe, from showing up exactly as you are, not as a version that's been polished for public consumption. The obsession with being liked is just another form of control. It teaches young women to manage perception instead of owning presence. It teaches them to adjust their glow so others don't feel outshined. But let me ask you this. When was the last time dimming yourself made you feel powerful? When was the last time pretending made you feel at peace? When you stop trying to manage how you're seen, you start focusing on who you actually are. And in that shift, something incredible happens. Your energy becomes magnetic, not because it's perfect, but because it's real. People can feel when you're faking. They can sense when your words are curated, when your presence is a performance. But they can also feel it when you're rooted. When you speak from a place that doesn't shake. That's where the power lives. That's where you start to lead. Authenticity doesn't require you to be fearless. It requires you to be brave enough to be disliked. And that kind of bravery changes everything. It reclaims your voice. It rewires your self-worth. It teaches you that peace isn't found in being accepted by everyone. It's found in being aligned with yourself. You don't owe anyone a diluted version of your truth. You don't owe softness when strength is called for. You don't owe smiles when your spirit is heavy. What you owe, above all, is loyalty to yourself. That's not selfish, it's sacred. Because when a young woman refuses to fake it, she gives every other woman watching her permission to stop faking it too. And that ripple is where revolutions begin. Perfection is the oldest trap set for young women. It's the shiny cage dressed up as achievement, beauty, elegance, and grace. But it's a prison, not a prize. They sell it to you early: flawless skin, spotless resumes, unshakable composure, effortless charm. They convince you that the closer you get to it, the more worthy you become. So you chase it. You starve yourself of rest, authenticity, vulnerability, and even joy just to appear polished. But perfection isn't real. It's a standard designed to keep you reaching, never arriving. And the more you chase it, the more disconnected you become from your instincts, from your truth, from your power. That's the point. If they can keep you editing yourself, they can keep you compliant. That's not empowerment. That's erasure with a smile on it. The pursuit of perfection is a war against your humanity. It teaches you to apologize for being human, for having bad days, for being emotional, for stumbling, for speaking too soon, or too late, or too loud. It makes you hyper, aware of your flaws and blind to your brilliance. You become your own harshest critic, punishing yourself for not living up to an illusion that no one actually lives. And it doesn't stop at appearance. It creeps into your work, your relationships, your sense of self. You start shrinking your ideas because they're not ready. You don't speak up unless you're sure you'll sound flawless. You withhold your light because you're still polishing it. But life doesn't wait for perfect. Opportunities don't reward silence. And greatness doesn't come dressed in flawlessness. It comes wrapped in effort, failure, grit, and truth. They taught you that being raw is risky, that showing your cracks makes you fragile, that being real means being vulnerable, and vulnerability is weakness. But that's the biggest lie. Your rawness is where your power begins. It's where your voice shakes but still speaks. It's where your eyes tear up but still look forward. It's where your truth gets loud enough to rise above the noise. The women who change the world aren't the ones who look perfect. They're the ones who are unafraid to be seen fully. Their mess becomes their message. Their flaws become their fire. Their imperfection becomes their impact. Because they show up as they are, not as the world wants them to be. That's not weakness. That's radical strength. When you embrace your rawness, you stop performing and start connecting. Because here's the truth. People don't fall in love with perfect. They fall in love with real. They resonate with your struggles, your passion, your resilience, not your polish. Your power isn't in the script you recite. It's in the conviction behind your words. It's in your courage to say, "This is me. I'm still learning. I'm still becoming. But I'm here and I'm enough." When you show up like that, you shift the energy in the room. You give others permission to drop the mask, to exhale, to be real. Too, that's leadership. That's influence. Not control, not perfection, but truth lived out loud. Every system that tries to perfect you is really trying to pacify you. They want you busy fixing yourself, so you don't challenge anything. A young woman obsessed with being flawless has no energy left to be fearless. She's too busy checking her reflection to see what's broken around her. But when you reject that false ideal, when you stop shrinking to fit the frame they gave you, you become dangerous. You start asking real questions. You start setting real boundaries. You stop waiting for permission and start creating your own path. That kind of self-trust is revolutionary. Because when a woman stops trying to be perfect, she becomes powerful beyond measure. There is nothing more magnetic than a woman who owns her flaws like armor. Not because she thinks she's better, but because she knows she doesn't have to be perfect to be whole. She walks in her stretch marks, her scars, her mistakes, her lessons. She doesn't hide them, she wears them. And people feel that. They see her and realize it's possible to be strong and soft, to be fierce and still growing. That's the real goal. Not perfection, but wholeness. And wholeness requires truth. It requires self-respect. It requires you to look at yourself in the mirror. Not through a filter, not through someone else's gaze, but through your own eyes, unflinching. And say, this is me, all of me. And I will not be perfected. I will be powerful. They told you silence was polite, that not speaking your mind was a form of grace, that swallowing your truth made you more likable, more composed, more mature. But let's be clear, silence is not kindness when it comes at the cost of your voice. It's not noble to keep peace on the outside while your spirit burns on the inside. They taught young women to stay quiet because a quiet woman is easier to control. She's easier to dismiss, easier to overlook. But you weren't born to be quiet. You weren't born to sit in rooms and nod at things that violate your soul. There is nothing gentle about shrinking yourself just to be accepted. And there is nothing admirable about being silent in a world that needs your voice. Every time you silence yourself to protect someone else's ego, you betray your own power. You become a stranger to your own truth. You start filtering your thoughts until even you don't recognize what you believe anymore. And it doesn't happen all at once. It's subtle. You hold back in meetings. You bite your tongue when someone crosses a boundary. You tell yourself, it's not worth it. But your silence becomes a pattern. And that pattern becomes a habit. And that habit becomes your identity. Suddenly, you're not just being quiet, you've become small. And the longer you stay silent, the more permission the world takes to define who you are and how far you're allowed to go. The world teaches young women that being nice is the highest virtue. That if you're kind, you'll be rewarded. That if you stay sweet and silent, the right people will notice. But kindness is not the same as silence. And niceness is not the same as strength. You can be kind and still be bold. You can be loving and still call out what's wrong. You can be respectful and still be unapologetic. Speaking up doesn't make you rude. It makes you real. And the people who confuse honesty with aggression have likely never been held accountable. Don't let their discomfort become your muzzle. Your voice was meant for more than approval. It was meant for impact. When a young woman chooses to speak her truth, she reclaims territory that was never meant to be taken from her. Her words become her armor. Her truth becomes her ground. And it doesn't have to be loud to be powerful. You don't need to shout to shake the room. You just need to speak from a place that refuses to be silenced. That's what makes people listen. Not the volume, but the conviction. And yes, some people will walk away. Some will call you too intense. Some will say you've changed. But if your silence kept those people in your life, maybe they were never aligned with your truth in the first place. Let them go. Your voice isn't meant for them. It's meant for those who are ready to hear it. Silence has consequences. It allows injustice to grow roots. It allows disrespect to become routine. It teaches others that your boundaries are flexible, that your dignity is negotiable. But when you speak, even when your voice shakes, you interrupt that narrative. You say, no more. You say, not here. You draw a line. And you don't need to explain why that line matters. You don't need to convince anyone that your truth is valid. The very act of standing in your truth is the justification. You don't owe the world silence just because they're more comfortable with you quiet. You owe yourself the truth, spoken clearly, lived boldly, and protected fiercely. A young woman with a voice is not just powerful. She's dangerous to the systems that rely on her obedience. That's why they push her to be quiet. That's why they call her emotional, dramatic, sensitive. Those labels are weapons designed to make her second guess herself. But your emotions are not weakness. They are signals. Your passion is not drama, it's depth. And your sensitivity is not a flaw, it's your superpower. Speak. Speak even if your voice trembles. Speak especially when it trembles. Because every time you do, you make it easier for the next woman to speak. You widen the path. You change the culture. You remind the world that silence may feel safe, but it will never lead to freedom. Only truth can do that. And truth must be spoken. You are not here to be understood by everyone, and you never were. The sooner you stop seeking universal approval, the freer you become. You weren't built to fit neatly into other people's expectations, their comfort zones, or their limited ideas of who you should be. That's their world, not yours. Your life isn't a democracy where everyone gets a vote on how you show up. And yes, some people will mislabel you. They'll call your confidence arrogance, your clarity aggression, your independence coldness. But what they think is none of your business. Your job isn't to explain yourself to people who are committed to misunderstanding you. Your job is to become undeniable, so powerful in your truth, so anchored in your purpose, that whether or not they approve becomes irrelevant. It's natural to want to be liked. We're wired for connection. But there's a dangerous line between being liked and being limited by others' perceptions. When you spend your life trying to be understood, you end up shrinking yourself into versions that are easier to digest. You water down your opinions, censor your voice, filter your energy. You over-explain, over-apologize, and over-perform just to keep the peace. But peace that costs your authenticity isn't peace at all. It's self-betrayal. And the more you do it, the more invisible you become. Not because you lack worth, but because you've buried it beneath layers of compliance. You were never meant to be beige. You were never meant to blend. You were meant to be bold, vivid loud when needed, silent when chosen, not when forced. When you make peace with being misunderstood, you start moving differently. You stop waiting for permission to exist fully. You stop trying to convert people who refuse to grow with you. You stop defending your choices to those who have no stake in your truth. It's not your responsibility to shrink your light so others can avoid their shadows. If they feel uncomfortable in your presence, that says more about their limitations than your power. Let them feel it. Let them stumble in the glare of your growth. Because the ones who are meant to walk with you will never ask you to dim. They'll adjust their eyes and rise to meet your frequency. Being undeniable isn't about arrogance. It's about alignment. It's about being so deeply rooted in who you are that you no longer perform for acceptance. You speak when it matters. You hold your ground when it's challenged. You stay soft without being small. You stay powerful without being performative. The world is full of noise. People faking their way through conversations, echoing opinions they don't believe in, following paths they don't even want. But a woman who knows who she is and doesn't flinch when the world tries to box her, that's a rare force. She doesn't seek validation because she is the validation. She doesn't chase belonging. She becomes the place others long to belong to. People may not get your vision, and that's okay. It wasn't handed to them. It was handed to you. So stop trying to make it make sense to minds that can't see beyond their own fear. What they call unrealistic is often just unfamiliar. What they call too ambitious is often just too brave for them to imagine. Their lack of understanding doesn't discredit your dream. It only reveals the limits of their imagination. Your job is not to shrink your mission to fit their view. Your job is to expand your reach until the only thing left is truth, unfiltered. The truth of who you are, what you believe, and what you're building. Even if no one claps, even if they mock it first, even if you're standing alone at the start, let them misunderstand. Let them doubt. Let them question. But don't you dare silence yourself to make them comfortable. Don't you dare clip your own wings so they can fly with ease. Because the moment you do, you stop being the force you were born to be. And the world doesn't need another woman who's agreeable. It needs a woman who's unforgettable. Not because she was understood by everyone, but because she was undeniably herself, no matter who didn't get it. Every time you fake who you are, even a little, you're training the world to respond to a version of you that doesn't exist. That version might be more agreeable, more charming, more pleasing, but it's not you. And what's worse, the validation you receive while pretending becomes meaningless. Because deep down, you'll always know they don't love you. They love the act, the performance. The curated personality you created to survive, not to thrive, that's a soul-crushing kind of loneliness, to be surrounded by approval and still feel unseen. When you abandon yourself to be accepted, you're not gaining connection, you're losing identity. And that is the slowest, most silent kind of self-destruction. Not because the world is cruel, but because you stopped letting it meet the real you. Pretending to be something you're not, for the sake of fitting in, is exhausting. It demands constant emotional labor. You analyze your tone, your expressions, your opinions, your appearance, all to match a mold you were never meant to fit. You smile when your spirit is tired. You nod when your mind screams, no. You stay when your heart wants to run. And eventually, you don't even know which parts of you are real anymore. Your truth gets buried beneath years of compromise. And you wake up one day feeling like a stranger in your own skin. That's the price of faking it. It costs you your clarity. It costs you your voice. And without those, you're not living, you're performing. The danger of pretending is that it becomes a habit. You don't even notice when it starts. Maybe it begins with saying yes when you mean no. Maybe it's laughing at jokes that offend you. Maybe it's agreeing with ideas you don't believe in just to keep the peace. But over time, those small betrayals add up. You convince yourself it's harmless. You call it professionalism, maturity, strategy. But in truth, it's fear. Fear of rejection. Fear of conflict. Fear of being too much or not enough. And fear, when left unchecked, becomes a lifestyle. One where you are always performing, never resting. Always adjusting, never grounded. Always surviving, never fully alive. What most people don't tell you is that being authentic will cost you. Some people will leave. Some doors will close. Some spaces will no longer feel comfortable. But that loss is necessary because it clears the room for truth. For people who recognize you without needing subtitles. For relationships that don't require translation. When you stop faking, you stop attracting energy that feeds off your silence. You stop entertaining people who only know how to connect with your mask. And what's left, what remains, is solid, real, rooted. There's no performance to maintain, no persona to protect. Just you. And that's where your peace lives. Being real doesn't mean being perfect. It doesn't mean you never grow, never evolve. In fact, authenticity invites evolution. Because when you're honest about who you are, you have a foundation strong enough to build on. You're no longer chasing someone else's standards. You're creating your own. And with that, you unlock your true potential. Not the version of you the world wants, but the version you were always meant to be. That kind of self-possession is rare. And because it's rare, it's misunderstood. But don't let that scare you. Don't let confusion from others make you question your clarity. They don't need to get it. You need to own it. Faking might win you moments, but being real builds a life. A real one. One where your presence isn't dependent on your performance. One where your love isn't conditional on your ability to play a part. One where you wake up and don't have to rehearse your personality just to face the day. That's the kind of freedom worth fighting for. That's the kind of truth worth standing in. Because the world has enough noise, enough masks, enough actors. What it needs, what it aches for, is a woman who walks in her truth with her head high, her voice steady, and her soul intact. Not perfect, not polished, just real. And real is always enough. So here's your call to action. Stop waiting to be understood. Stop editing your power. Stop translating your truth into smaller language for smaller minds. You were not born to blend in. You were born to stand out, shake things up, and lead with your full, unfiltered self. Let them misunderstand. Let them stare. Let them talk. But you walk forward anyway. You speak anyway. You rise anyway. Because the world doesn't remember the ones who played it safe. It remembers the ones who refused to be anything less than real. Be that woman, starting now.